Neil Boehner made announcement in a meeting is a tweet that he sent it out. I'm sure we'll find out some news about that over the course of the day. That's going to do it for today. Make sure to join us back here tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern and 4 a.m. Pacific. Hope you have a great Tuesday.
The House will be in order.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., February 11, 2014. I hereby appoint the Honorable Doug LaMalfa to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 7, 2014, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning-hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, during a hearing with the Deputy Director of the Office of Drug Policy, there was a moment of clarity for me. I was struck by the realization that our own office, charged with drug policy, discouraging or eliminating their use, might well be part of the problem. The poor witness was unable to answer my simple question: what is more dangerous, marijuana or methamphetamines? I asked, how many marijuana overdose deaths were there last year? No answer. The United States does have a drug problem, make no mistake, and it appears to be getting worse. 100 people per day die of drug overdoses, but only 9 of them are from heroin. 60% of the deaths are from prescription drug, pharmaceuticals, over 22,000 in 2010, the most recent year we have available, almost 3 times higher than in 1999. Why is the $25 billion we spend fighting drugs each year so ineffective in stopping, much less reversing, the trend? Are our policies and programs misguided? Could it be that too many of the wrong people are spending far too long in jail, wasting lives and money? The states seem to think so. They're reducing sentences and releasing prisoners. Now even the federal government is starting to do that. I think part of the problem is that we aren't honest about the impacts and danger. Nothing better illustrates that than the continued misclassification of marijuana under federal law as worse than cocaine, according to federal law. Is it possible that this federal dishonesty means people don't take drug warnings seriously? No one knows anybody who ever died from a marijuana overdose. The failed marijuana prohibition could actually make the real drug problem worse. Since all marijuana sales are by definition illegal, in the shadows, the money, the income, the profits help finance drug trade that destroys life, like heroin, cocaine, illegal prescription drugs, and methamphetamines. How easy is it for the distributor, who has no license to lose, never checks ID, to offer his marijuana customer something else, something worse, something more dangerous? I fear spreading misinformation and wasting resources arresting 2/3 of a million people for something most Americans now think should be legal, undermines what could be an effective approach. Think for a moment. Unlike marijuana, tobacco is a highly addictive killer. Hundreds of thousands of people a year die. Yet tobacco use has declined almost 2/3. How did that happen? We don't arrest people who smoke. We didn't try tobacco prohibition. What we did was research. We found out the facts. We told the truth. We controlled the product. We taxed it heavily, raising the cost, especially to young people. All the steps exactly the opposite of our failed marijuana approach. And I'll be clear, for me this goes beyond issues of marijuana policy. It is a symbol of a political process that is not thoughtful, not rational, on dealing with things from the national debt to our failing infrastructure to climate change. Isn't it time for us to face some facts, adjust some policies, and move ahead?
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross Leighton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, we had beautiful skies in Miami. It was a perfect day for flying, and I was given the opportunity to visit the Wings Over Miami Air Museum to revel in the history of aviation with veterans, flyers, and the families of World War II women Air Force service pilots, celebrating the life of one special WASP, Fran Sargent. We came to honor these American heroines, the first women in history to fly America's military aircraft. They flew over 60 million miles in every type of aircraft on every type of mission except combat missions. The WASP served our country without hesitation and with no expectations of recognition or praise. Yet, as our 23rd President Benjamin Harrison once noted, the manner by which women are treated is a good criterion to judge the true state of a society. These courageous women had never received the full recognition they warranted for their wartime military service to America. It was my honor then, as the most senior Republican woman in the House of Representatives, to introduce the bipartisan legislation to honor and award the women air service pilots of World War II with the Congressional Gold Medal. The Congressional Gold Medal is the highest honor that this body, the United States Congress, can bestow. Co-introducing the bill with me was Congresswoman Susan Davis of California and Senators Kay Bailey Hutchison and Barbara Mikulski. Senator Hutchison of Texas and Senator Mikulski of Maryland. I was so honored to be part of this effort to finally grant these women the recognition they deserved. It was right there at the Wings Over Miami Air Museum in August of 2009 that I was able to present to our local WASP framed, signed copies of the legislation for the Women's Air Force Service Pilots Congressional Gold Medal. And in March of 2010, the presentation ceremony of the Congressional Gold Medal was held in Emancipation Hall in our nation's capital with over 100 WASP in attendance. South Florida is very fortunate to herald several women Air Force Service pilots in our midst. Air Force Major Ruth Schaefer Fleischer is now retired. Bee Haydu is active and says hello to her fellow WASP. Shirley Chase Cruz was there with us on Saturday and shared her vivid memories, while Jeremy Snap and family represented his mother, whom we recently lost, Helen Wyatt Snap. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we gathered for a celebration of life and a memorial for Frances Rohr Sargent, who was well represented by her daughter, Donna, and Terry and Jim Timmons, and Fran's son, Kenny Sargent, with many great and great-grandchildren honoring their WASP. My thanks to Aviatrix Ursula Davidson and all the women pilots flying with the 99s for honoring these women of aviation, and to the Civil Air Patrol and the crew at Wings Over Miami for making the day possible. We know you loved Fran as your Director Emeritus and as a great teacher of flight. How special are they, these women pioneers of flight? Well, while 25,000 volunteered, only 1,830 qualified women pilots were accepted, and then only 1,102 women earned the Wings of WASP. The WASP are all true pioneers whose examples paved the way for the armed services to finally lift the ban on women attending military flight training in the 1970s. While flying their P-14s and AT-4s in training in Sweetwater, Texas, the WASP never sought to break the barriers for women, but through their service and their success, more opportunities became available for women in all fields. Fran became a professor at my alma mater, Miami-Dade College, where she took charge of developing the aviation program. One of her students, 73-year-old Judy Portnoy, called Professor Sargent the most amazing person I know. Mr. Speaker, today women in military fly every type of aircraft from F-15s to the space shuttle. My daughter-in-law, Lindsay Nelson, a Marine Corps pilot, is part of this lasting legacy of WASP. Lindsay, a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, served combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, where she flew F-18 fighter jets. I'm so proud of Lindsay and all of our service women, past and present, who continue to inspire young women to achieve what was heretofore unimaginable. So on behalf of Lindsay, my congressional colleagues, and a grateful nation, I offer my sincere thanks and utmost admiration to our WASP. Climbing high into the sun, Helen, Ruth, Bee, Shirley, and Fran. Thank you all, women pioneers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlelady from Florida yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all things are subject to interpretation, but as Nietzsche once said, whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is often more a function of power and not truth. Last week, the Congressional Budget Office came out with a report evaluating the economic impacts of the Affordable Care Act. And since then, there are those who have used the power they have to frame a false narrative. Rather than talking about what the report actually says, they spent the last week talking about what they'd like it to say. Their false interpretation, the Obamacare Act will cost the American economy 2.5 million jobs. But the truth is that the much misrepresented CBO study didn't say that at all, because as the Wall Street Journal accurately reported, reducing the total number of hours Americans have to work is very different than eliminating jobs. One of the reasons we passed the Affordable Care Act in the first place was to fix the pitfalls of this country's employer-based health care system. Before the ACA, someone with a pre-existing condition was often forced to stay in their job to avoid losing their health care coverage. Even if they wanted to leave their job to reduce their hours, to retire early, change careers, or spend more time with their families, they couldn't, because doing so would risk their ability to provide affordable health insurance for their families. What the Affordable Care did was right this wrong. By broadening access to health insurance, the ACA has increased personal freedom and market choice. Now Americans can choose jobs based on what they want to be doing instead of staying where they are unhappy just to keep their insurance. The expansion of Medicaid eligibility and the subsidies available in the exchanges will give Americans the flexibility they need to raise their families, not encourage workers to seek less employment, which was one of the most misleading claims made after the report was released. The idea that hard-working Americans would modify their employment just to be eligible for social safety net programs is both ludicrous and offensive. Nobody wants to live in a situation that makes you eligible for Medicaid or other social safety net programs. But too many hard-working Americans are forced to. In Illinois, a family of four must exist on less than $32,500 a year to qualify for these programs. In the Chicago area, the cost of living is high, and families struggle to make ends meet. Measures like Medicaid and SNAP are meant to help people lift themselves above poverty. But claiming that poor people want to be poorer to rely more on the government is misguided and just flat out wrong. I've said from the beginning that the ACA is far from perfect and that we should work together to improve it. But arguing that at-risk Americans and low-income Americans will actively choose to work less, reducing their own incomes and jeopardizing their family's economic future just to game the system is not a legitimate issue and speaks volumes about the extreme views that are dividing our government and preventing real reform from occurring. By focusing on false interpretations, we're forgetting the economic benefits contained in the law. To quote the CBO report, if some people seek to work less, other applicants will be readily available to fill those positions, and the overall effect on employment will be muted. At a time when long-term unemployment is at its highest since World War II, there are more than enough American workers willing and able to take these jobs. That's why the director of the CBO recently testified about the likelihood of the ACA creating jobs, not eliminating them. The report also acknowledged that insurance premiums under the law are 15% lower than originally forecast, that the slowdown in Medicare cost growth is broad and persistent, and that enrollments will increase over time to where they would have been if not for the website's issues. Mr. Speaker, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, millions of Americans can now access affordable health insurance with a focus on personal responsibility, preventive care, consumer protections, and increased choices. The Affordable Care Act has helped empower Americans to lead healthier lives. Let's put aside the punditry and focus on the facts. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Holding, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to share a story about Patrick Johnson. Patrick's a firefighter from North Carolina who is using new technologies and his programming skills in his mission to save lives. Patrick is using Google Glass along with the Android and iPhone apps he's developed to support firefighters on the job. The apps he's created encourage and increase communication between firefighters and emergency responders to accelerate the process of saving victims and putting out fires as quickly as possible. Now, although Google Glass is not yet on the market, except for Google's Explorer program, it has generated a lot of buzz in the tech community. With Glass, people can send and view messages and emails and videos and pictures and surf the net without using their hands. They can also ask the device for information or get directions, again, without using their hands. Patrick's Glass app would help firefighters locate incidents and hydrants and give them hands-free ability of building layouts and record video from the first responders on the scene. Some departments that have expressed interest in this technology want to take it a step further, such as linking the app to a thermal imaging camera and oxygen mask to increase firefighters' ability to see in smoke. Now, although it's still in its preliminary stages of development, technologies like Patrick's could potentially help firefighters and other emergency response teams do their jobs and save lives. Mr. Speaker, Patrick's idea is a perfect example of how technology betters our lives and can ultimately save lives. Innovation leads to job creation, and we need to encourage more innovators like Patrick to keep America on top of as the world's leader in innovation. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, on Sunday morning, I tweeted out a message to 30,000 people who follow me on Twitter. The tweet said, "The GOP doesn't determine when the fight for immigration reform ends. We will continue to fight for a bill in 2014 because it is what is right, what is fair, and what is best for the USA." I sent this because many in the pro-immigration reform movement thought they heard Speaker John Boehner giving up on immigration reform for 2014. That is not what I heard, but many in the community and the press heard it that way. I wanted to make it clear that the immigrant community and the huge movement behind immigration reform, business and clergy and everyone else, were just not going away. We're not taking wait, maybe, and no for an answer. By now, every time Speaker Boehner says anything about immigration reform, the press and the pundits go crazy. Even if it isn't clear what exactly the Speaker said, a good percentage of the press runs out and writes obituary number 247 for immigration reform. What I heard the Speaker say last week was that getting immigration reform passed in the House would be hard. Tell me about it. I just heard the Speaker say at his news conference that the House needs to get immigration reform done this year. He's right. And then I heard the Speaker say that the GOP doesn't trust the President of the United States. Really? Despite 2 million deportations and the lowest rate of illegal immigration in recent decades, the House GOP doesn't believe President Barack Obama will enforce immigration laws? Well, Mr. Speaker, I've been working on this issue for a while, and first of all, you're right, it is hard. For more than a decade, I had to work on my own party to get them behind substantial immigration reform. But the Democrats are ready now and ready to help you, Mr. Speaker, pass a bill. And the movement will help supporters of immigration reform and the House GOP caucus work to convince their members that moving forward to actual legislation is not only the right thing to do from a justice perspective, from a law and order perspective, from an economic perspective, but the right thing to do from a political perspective. And, Mr. Speaker, when you said the House needs to pass a bill, boy, you're right. Nobody believes the Republican Party can elect anyone president unless you find some way to neutralize the damage you have done to yourselves with your deportation-only approach to immigration. And the immigration issue doesn't just hurt you with Latino voters. It hurts you with Asian and younger voters, too. There's simply no math that adds up to 270 electoral votes unless the Republican Party stops getting slaughtered by 30, 40, and 50 points among the largest, fastest-growing groups of voters in this country. And it gets only worse with each passing day, with another 2,000 Latino citizens turning 18 every day and becoming eligible to vote. Speaker Boehner knows that this is the best chance his party has of getting the immigration issue off the table before 2016, and I believe he plans to come back to immigration reform. The cost to the GOP politically is just too high if the GOP-controlled House blocks legislation this year. You thought the Super Bowl was a blowout last month? Wait till November 2016 if immigration reform is still hanging out there undone. You can tell the babysitter you'll be home by 10:30 on election night. The contest will be over early. It's Democrat in the White House by a landslide. But this notion, Mr. Speaker, that President Obama cannot be trusted to enforce immigration law, that just doesn't make any sense to anyone who follows the issue. Every day, day after day, week after week, and year after year, people are being disappeared by our immigration enforcement machine. Another 1,100 today and tomorrow. Where's the generosity of spirit in that? This lax, liberal, soft-heartedness you seem to imagine. I wish you could tell that to the estimated 5,000 children currently in foster care because their parents are in detention or have already been deported. Tell them how soft Obama is. I'm going out to suburban Washington this evening to talk with immigrants and advocates at Casa de Maryland. I don't suspect I'll hear very much praise for President Obama's enlightened approach to deportations and detention tonight. They're not waiting patiently for Speaker Boehner or anyone else in the Republican caucus to make up their minds on whether or when to start legislating on this matter either. I know they are not taking maybe or not now or no for an answer. Mr. Speaker, you're not going to be spared. Kids will keep showing up to interrupt your breakfast as long as their parents are facing deportation and the communities are being ripped apart. Mr. Speaker, you can't deport your way out of this, and you can't ignore your way out of this, and you can't blame Obama your way out of this. You must act for the good of the country. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'm on the House floor today to share with my colleagues several recent headlines from our national papers. From the Washington Post on January the 30th, and I quote, headlines: after billions in United States investment, Afghanistan roads are falling apart. This article goes on to describe the Afghan road network built with U.S. tax dollars as a $4 billion project that was once a symbol of promise in post-Taliban Afghanistan, but is now falling apart. Another headline from January the 30th, This one out of the New York Times, and I quote, U.S. aid to Afghanistan flows on despite warning of misuse. Despite warnings of misuse. This report informs us that 2 global auditing firms hired by the United States 3 years ago have found that none of the 16 Afghan ministries can be counted on to keep American aid from being stolen or wasted. Stolen or wasted. And most recently, this week Reuters published an article titled, and I quote, U.S. aid plan seeks to shield Afghanistan from end to war economy, which details a new initiative from the United States Agency for International Development that would spend almost $300 million to prop up the Afghan economy. Mr. Speaker, the common fact in these articles is that each describes in alarming details the absolute waste of American tax dollars overseas. The absolute waste of American tax dollars overseas. How can we in good conscience tell the American people we are going to continue to send their money to Afghanistan for 10 more years under the bilateral strategic agreement that the United States is currently negotiating with President Karzai? I hope President Karzai will not sign the agreement. It would be the best thing to happen to the American taxpayer. Ironically, today or tomorrow we're going to raise the debt ceiling. This is after already raising it by $230 billion in October of 2013, with $30 billion reserved for Afghanistan. This is not right or fair to the American people. We need to stop the insanity in Afghanistan, which could be done if the leaders of the House and the Senate would allow members of both parties to bring bills related to this issue to the floor for a vote. In addition to the money we are spending, how many more American lives must be lost overseas before Congress decides to act? We cannot continue to waste American money, precious lives in this manner. It is time to end the abuse of the American resources in Afghanistan. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will ask God to continue to bless our men and women in uniform. Ask God to please continue to bless America, and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in appreciation this morning. Next week, I am leaving the Congress to pursue the chance to build a career in the private sector. And I wanted to take a few minutes of appreciation and thanksgiving this morning for a lot of people who have helped make this wonderful experience possible. I start, as all things in my life, with my wife, Camille, my daughters, Jacqueline and Josie, without whom nothing good would be possible and through whom all good things are. I look forward to many, many more happy years, God willing, with them, and thank them for their support and sacrifice. I thank my staff. Over all of these years, these men and women are overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated, sometimes by their employer. These are true public servants. They are inspirations, and I assure you that I have learned much more from them than I have taught to them. I want to single out in particular in the present staff our Chief of Staff, Fran Tagmeyer, our General Counsel, Amanda Caruso, and our Legislative Director, J.Z. Golden, for their excellence, and for many, many others over many, many years. I want to thank my colleagues. I thank Speaker Boehner for his friendship and leadership. I especially thank the first woman Speaker of the House of Representatives, in my view the best Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, who has taught me strength and principle and doggedness and focus, and whose inspiration will guide me, my daughters, and other sons and daughters for many years to come. I thank her profoundly for her influence and service. I thank all of my colleagues. I want to come back to that in a minute. I most especially thank the people of the 1st Congressional District of the state of New Jersey, who have been the best employer one could possibly have for these last 24 years. And yes, I would include the people who stop us in the supermarket and complain about a vote that we've cast or wonder why we haven't solved a problem. There are a few of them. There are many, many more whose words of encouragement have lifted us up for all these years. And I assure you that we appreciate you and we're staying in our community and looking forward to new ways that we can serve our friends and our neighbors. I especially, though, do want to come back to the men and women with whom I've had the privilege of serving for all these years. We've done a lot of things that are good together. Some of us have always not agreed with what's good together, but we've passed the Affordable Care Act, which I believe will withstand the test of time and will stand together with Medicare and Social Security as pillars of middle-class prosperity and American opportunity. We've opened the door for college students through the Direct Student Loan Program that has helped many, many millions of students get an education. We've improved our environment. In our district at home, there are construction workers building transportation projects today because of our work. There are police and firefighters and teachers on the job because of our cooperation. There are 2 veterans health clinics. We can simply not say thank you with our words to our veterans, but by our deeds. And I must say this morning that I especially remember young men and women on duty around the world serving our country, and I express my deepest appreciation to them. But to my colleagues, I would say this, that I've had 150,000 constituents over the years come to our office with various issues and problems, and they are certainly an inspiration. But so too, ladies and gentlemen, are you, my colleagues. The House is a rambunctious and energetic place. I suspect we'll see some of that rambunctiousness even later today. We've seen a little bit this morning. People should not confuse debate with division. Healthy, passionate debate is the elixir of American democracy. It is the fuel that makes the country better. And for those who look at the House and say, well, all we ever do is argue with each other, I would certainly hope so. I would certainly hope we would bring to this chamber deeply held beliefs, deeply held convictions, and express them in the course of debate. Of course, there is time for compromise, and there's always a season to get the job done. But may this place never lose the strong convictions of people right and left, Republican and Democrat, north, south, east, and west, because it's what makes democracy go. And also say this, that we in this chamber should never confuse a difference of opinion with a difference of intention. I have served here for nearly 24 years, and I can safely say I have never met a fellow member who does not love this country, who was not here for the purpose of improving this country as he or she sees that improvement. I have certainly disagreed with the definition of improvement, but I have never questioned the motivation or motive of any of the men and women with whom I've had the privilege of serving. So my admonition would be, keep the energy flowing. Those who misunderstand debate, let them misunderstand it. Keep the passionate beliefs that occupy this place going. And when we do, I leave with great confidence that the institution will continue to lead the way to a country that's more prosperous, more safe, more free, and more generous than any nation in the history of the face of the earth. It's been an honor and privilege to serve. I thank each of you who has given me this privilege, and I yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews, yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as Rob departs the chamber, let me thank him for his service and for his family's service as obviously the first Republican member to be able to respond to your comments. Let me say what most of us always know, that although many of us disagree on public policy, no one's ever questioned your commitment, your sacrifice, your focus, and your tenacity. And I think I value that more than almost anything we do. And your words are very important for us and for the American people to understand that spirited debate is not bad. It is a part of this process. A former high school teacher in government history, we would relish this in our classrooms, to have this type of exchange between our students. So thank you for that, and I'm just fortunate to be here when you made your comments. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to focus and turn my comments to Sochi, Russia, as the world focuses on that area of the world. Let me talk about what's going on on the southern side of the Caucasus mountain range in the country of Georgia. Small country, but people have to understand that the Russian Federation occupies 2 provinces of the country of Georgia, actually with military troops. One for a long time, South Ossetia, one relatively recently in Abkhazia. And that kind of changes the understanding of this great show that the Russian Federation is putting on with the treatment of their neighbors in occupying provinces. That would be like, you know, a country occupying 1 or 2 of our states, in occupying 1 or 2 of the provinces in Georgia. So, Mr. Speaker, it's important to just remind the public of this, especially when the world's focus is in there. And I want to specifically talk about what's happened because of with the Olympics and the Abkhazia region using Olympic security as an excuse. Russia has actually created a so-called buffer zone between Abkhazia and Georgia, pushing the ceasefire line established in 2008 7 miles further into Georgia territory. So here we have an international peace agreement that kind of sets a line where the allowing the occupation in Georgian territory of Russian forces, and then the Russian Federation decides, based upon the Olympics, to push that line further into the country of Georgia 7 more miles. It is very troubling, and a troubling extension of Russia's earlier efforts to enclose South Ossetia, this other province, in a barbed wire enclave. And this new incursion of Georgian territory is a violation of Georgia's sovereignty, as it stands in stark contrast to Russia's many commitments under international law. According to the ceasefire signed in August 12, 2008, Russian military forces were to return to their pre-war positions, yet they have now established militarized security perimeters on the Georgian side of the administrative border with both South Ossetia and Abkhazia. This is a violation of the European Convention on Human Rights, to which Russia is a signatory, and a violation of customary international law. Russian President Putin claims that he must close borders within the internationally recognized territory of Georgia to prevent security threats in Sochi. This move is nothing more than a power grab. I will continue to support Georgia's sovereignty and urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Alabama, Mrs. Sewell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to continue my commitment to honoring influential African Americans from Alabama during this Black History Month. This week, we honor the heroines of the movement for civil rights and voting rights. These courageous women had tremendous roles in our nation's fight for justice and equality, and I am honored to share their stories. Today, I honor the tremendous life and legacy of Mrs. Amelia Boynton Robinson. Amelia was a key figure in the voting rights movement in Selma, Alabama, and she is often remembered for her historic role in Bloody Sunday on that solemn day on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. At 102 years old, she is an American treasure whose story is a testament to her commitment to serving as a conduit of change. Amelia Boynton Robinson was born August 18, 1911, in Savannah, Georgia. Her mother was an activist during the women's suffrage movement. After the passage of the 19th Amendment, she and her mother would distribute voter registration information to women from the family's horse and buggy in the 1920s. Her mother's tireless efforts to secure the right to vote for women would have a lasting impact on Amelia. It also paved the way for the young activist to claim her own place in history. Fueled by the same passion, Amelia began her own service to mankind when she and her husband, Samuel Boynton, fought for voting rights and property ownership for blacks in the poorest rural counties of Alabama.
She was later named the only female lieutenant to Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement. In this role, Amelia would travel alongside Dr. King and often appear in his stead for various events and gatherings during the movement. Amelia is best known for being on the front lines during Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama. During the protest, she was gassed, beaten, and left for dead at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Despite the violent attacks, this heroine was committed to staying the course. Her direct involvement in the movement to led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Amelia was such a valued part of this process that some of the contents of the bill were drafted at her kitchen table in Selma. On May 5, 1964, Amelia Boynton broke yet another barrier when she became the first woman in the state of Alabama to run for Congress. She garnered 10.7% of the vote during a time when very few blacks were registered voters. Her historic run further solidified her impact on the movement for human rights, civil rights, and voting rights in Alabama. When this extraordinary woman wasn't contributing her time to the causes of her generation, she worked as an educator, a home agent with the Department of Agriculture, an insurance agent, an income tax preparer, as well as a real estate agent. She attended Georgia State Industrial School, which is now known as Savannah State University, and Tuskegee Normal, which is also known as Tuskegee University. I am certain that I would not stand before you today as Alabama's first black congresswoman without the tremendous contributions of this amazing woman. It is indeed humbling to experience this and pay honor and tribute to the first African-American woman to pursue this office in my great state. Her compelling story is one that reminds us of the undeniable power of courage. She refused to be silent and even risked her life to blaze trails for future generations. And at 102 years old, Amelia is still alive and still with us today, and she is still dispensing her wisdom. As we celebrate Black History Month and the notable contributions of African Americans to this country, I ask my colleagues to join me in saluting Mrs. Amelia Boynton Robinson, an Alabama gem and an American treasure. I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Penn State University's Lunar Lion team will make history as the first ever university-led space mission to the moon. This group of talented young minds is competing in the Google Lunar X Prize competition to land a robotic spacecraft on the moon in December of 2015. The mission, which the team began preparing in January of 2013, includes a launch on board a commercial space vehicle, a cruise through space for 5 days, landing, and a relaunch for a second landing on the moon. The mission will then be used to send high-resolution images, videos, and other information back to Penn State's Mission Control Center. To put this in perspective, only the U.S., Russia, India, Japan, and China have ever landed a craft on the moon, and Penn State looks to join this elite club next year. The Lunar Lion team includes Penn State science and engineering researchers, as well as 80 undergraduate and graduate students in science, technology, engineering, and math programs commonly known as STEM, as well as communications, business, logistics, computer science, and information technology, just to name a few majors. The team will have the opportunity to gain hands-on experience in spacecraft design, construction, and operation. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, the team is learning skills necessary for public-private partnerships through collaboration with NASA and commercial space companies. And like so many of the university's education and research initiatives, it will also be used to support new innovations and research in the private sector, real-world outcomes that will benefit not just the students, but America's competitiveness. Penn State's bold mission sets the stage for a resurgence of interest in space exploration among America's youth and demonstrates an exciting practical application of STEM education. The team is making great progress towards the mission. Prototype development is underway, and last month the team commenced rocket testing. As a Penn State alumnus and a lifelong resident of Centre County, I take great pride in the university and its long list of scholastic and volunteer achievements. The Lunar Lion team adds another stellar achievement to that list. The work at the university has led to the formation and development of this program is another example of innovation and creative leadership on the part of the Penn State community. As one of the only nonprofit groups working towards the Lunar X Prize and the only university, those working on this Lunar Lion project in State College are truly doing something special. Mr. Speaker, I want to offer my very best to the Penn State Lunar Lion team as they continue this important work. Your community and the nation are very proud. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before presenting the topic on which I plan to speak about this morning, I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the career of Congressman Rob Andrews, who leaves this House on February 18th after a remarkable career. We will be losing amazing talent, a great intellect, and a fine leader. And it's been a great privilege to serve with him and to watch him do his work so ably. We will miss you, Rob. I now rise, Mr. Speaker, to speak for the 29th time on this House floor about rape in the military. I rise today to speak on a scathing report on military sexual assault by the Associated Press. Sexual assault scandals exposed by the press are the new norm for the military, but this damning report offers us a window into the gross mishandling of sexual assault at the hands of the chain of command on a massive scale. This weekend, a deluge of sex crimes reports in Japan have been revealed, thanks not to the military disclosing them, but to the Associated Press through FOIA requests. The data reveal how broken the military scales of justice truly are and offer a rare glimpse into how reports of sexual assault are handled. Many of these stories involved commanders that undermined investigations, refused to bring a case to court-martial, or overturned a case after a jury had found the perpetrator guilty and sentenced them to jail. Of the 1,000 reports, punishments were wildly inconsistent, and of the suspects determined to be guilty, 2/3 of them spent no time in jail at all. In more than 30 cases, a letter of reprimand was the only punishment. What is truly unacceptable is that we had to rely on FOIA requests at all. These cases and their outcomes must face the light of day and the scrutiny of the taxpayers that pay for our military in the first place, and I intend to work to make sure that this happens. What is clear from these cases is that commanders are part of the problem, not the solutions. Commanders often decide to not move forward with court-martials, but when they did, even with DNA evidence and tape-recorded confessions of rape, the predators were typically given mild punishments after pleading to lesser offenses. In the culture of the military, the rules simply don't apply. Commanders also lessened numerous punishments unilaterally, and 2 cases threw out guilty verdicts and punishments completely. Among the most disturbing stories in the AP analysis was about a doctor at a health clinic at the Naval Air Facility near Tokyo. Airman Tina Wilson went to the clinic in 2008 to have a dressing changed following surgery on her tailbone by the doctor, Lieutenant Commander Anthony L. Velasquez. Decided it was perfectly okay to slip his hand down the front of her panties and then have the nerve to give her a smile and a wink as she walked to the door. Wilson complained, an investigation was started, and 3 other women also reported the doctor had touched them inappropriately. But after 10 months, the investigation was closed with no action taken, according to an NCIS document on the investigation obtained by the AP. The story gets even more disgusting. 2 years later, the Navy finally filed charges against the doctor after more than 25 women reported he touched them too. But guess what? Most of the charges were dropped under a plea deal, and the doctor served just a week in the brig. He was dismissed and thankfully stripped of his license, but Velasquez could have been stopped years before. Instead, he was allowed to carry on his lewd behavior and scar so many more victims. Airman Tina Wilson left the Navy, distraught over how the case was handled, according to the AP analysis. This is another of the thousands of tragedies of how sexual assault victims are treated in the military justice system. They often lead or are forced out after making their reports and enduring a grueling, unjust process. Survivors often face retaliation and punishment while their predators get letters of reprimand. And the retaliation is brutal. Survivors are debased, humiliated, and then discharged by the military they so proudly served because another service member raped them or sexually assaulted them. As we know, there are an estimated 26,000 sexual assaults a year in the military. But reporting is low, court-martials are rare, and the conviction rate is less than 1%. This is the result of a legal system beholden to the chain of command that some are hell-bent on protecting. It is time to pass the STOP Act and bring back justice for all service members, especially victims. When will we stop protecting the predators? I yield back.
Holmes' time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes.
I seek unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to join my colleagues in again calling attention to our continued war on poverty, and I thank my colleague and neighbor, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, for leading this effort. This war is, however, but the latest chapter in a larger struggle that goes all the way back to the founding of our country. When we declared our independence in 1776, Thomas Jefferson helped define the purpose and the mission of this new country with his timeless words in that Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, he wrote, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They endeavored on what was called at the time a freedom experiment. It was this perfect idea that no longer should this British nobility system prevail where your destiny was often charted for you before you were even born, based on where you were born or to whom you were born to. It was the idea that you should be able to decide your own independence, chart your own destiny. It was a perfect idea carried out by imperfect men. Wasn't extended to African Americans, wasn't extended to women. Certain religious sects were left out. And so we fought a civil war, ended slavery. We went through the suffragist movement, and women were given the right to vote. Eventually, entire classes of people, Catholics, the poor, and others who had been shut out, were now brought in to American opportunity. Today, when I think about what are some of the final frontiers of freedom that have not yet been expanded, I think back to President Johnson. And we're very grateful for President Johnson's declaration of the war on poverty. 50 years ago, he stated that we are in a war on poverty and we must fight for civil rights. He signed legislation that marked the beginning of the end of the Jim Crow era. He also recognized it was time to give the poor a real chance to pursue their happiness. He hearkened back, just as I did, to our nation's beginning. President Johnson said that our founders made a covenant with this new land and that it was conceived in justice. In his words, justice was the promise that all who made the journey should share in the fruits of the land. So began a renewed effort in America to fight poverty, a renewed effort to give those who are poor the freedom to dream that they could be anything that they want. We recognize that kids need to be better prepared before they go to school, so we created the Head Start program. We recognized the critical importance of health and wellness, and so we created Medicare and Medicaid. But this freedom to dream has not yet been expanded across America. In fact, I see every day that there are still millions of children living in poverty. And just like every politician, when I see one of these young children in a schoolhouse, I ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And after doing this a number of times, I realized I should really ask them, are you hungry? Are you cold? Are you safe? Because the opportunities around them, the crumbling buildings they're trying to learn in, the parents who are working at a minimum wage that is not a living wage, this does not provide them with the tools that these children need to realize their opportunity. This leaves them no different than a child born in the 1700s under a British nobility system. The freedom to dream is no different, and they are no more able to dream beyond where they were born or whom they were born to. So our goal must be to continue to fight this war on poverty, to give every child across every schoolhouse in this country the freedom to dream. This means we must raise the minimum wage. We must extend unemployment insurance for the long-term unemployed so that they can find a job and make sure they can reinforce the skills at home that their children are learning in the classroom. We will not rest on this issue until I can ask, and every member of this Congress can ask, a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that child will be able to say, my country has given me the tools to be anything I want. And I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields back. Okay. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
So members are taking a break now before beginning legislative work at noon Eastern. On the agenda today, a bill allowing the Financial Stability Oversight Council to set aside certain financial regulations from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Also, CQ is reporting, along with a number of other sources, that the House is dumping its reported debt limit plan. The story by Paul Krawzak and Alan Oda of CQ Roll Call says House Republicans will bring a clean extension of the debt limit to the House floor tomorrow after failing to agree on plans on Monday to tie a one-year extension of the debt limit to a repeal in a cut in pensions for younger military veterans and create a new fund for changes in medical payments. House and Ways and Means Committee Chair Dave Camp confirmed the change of plans after a meeting of the House Republican Conference this morning. Again, votes on the clean debt limit increase expected tomorrow, and we will have more live House coverage when members return at noon Eastern here on C-SPAN. Earlier this hour, House Republican leaders wrapped up a briefing covering a number of topics, but also